Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Career Cloud Radio. I'm your host, Michael Gardon. I'm on a mission to help you break your career and redesign your work life so you can unleash the best version of yourself on the world. To do this, I talk to ordinary people who have taken the extraordinary step to break their career rulebook and own their future. Remember, to have a great life, you don't need a job, you need a revenue source. So my guest today is Alexis Grant. She is the founder and CEO of They Got Acquired, a media company that helps entrepreneurs sell online businesses. But before she got there, she was previously the executive vice president of content at the Penny Hoarder, a personal finance media brand where she worked alongside the founder as the third employee to scale the company's content operations. She also founded The Right Life, an online community for writers that she sold in 2021. Lexi began her career as a reporter at the Houston Chronicle and U.S. News & World Report before growing a boutique content marketing agency, which was acquired by the Penny Hoarder in 2015. Today, she lives with her husband and two young kids in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. Lexi's a friend. We had a great conversation and a great time filming this episode. I hope you enjoy it. Today's episode is sponsored by Quotebook. I'm a side hustler. I like to dabble. If you're looking for a great holiday gift, check out my kids and my side hustle called Quotebook. That's www.quotebookjournal.com. Quotebook is a great gift for young couples or family with young kids to start building the daily habit of capturing all of the funniness in their lives. The kids and I built Quotebook out of our tradition of capturing all the funny things we say in our family, and we live them whenever we want. You can use the code THEBREAK for 15% off. Lexi, welcome to the show. So glad to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm excited to catch up with you and learn more about all of the stuff that you're doing currently. I love this idea of your site and the platform that you're doing and kind of highlighting smaller founder exits. And I think that's really important. We'll get into it in terms of my thoughts on Silicon Valley and the narrative and all of that kind of stuff. But one of the things that I like to do with the audience is I like to give them an idea of people, the backstory around people who are doing really interesting things and have changed their careers and done, own their mark in the world, and kind of give them an idea of the decision points and how you got to those things. So I want to start with kind of charting your journey a little bit. And so my first question is, when you were in college or when you were younger, what was your vision of what you were going to do with your career?
Well, I don't think I had a great vision, to be honest. I always loved writing, and my parents noticed that and nudged me in that direction. I went to a liberal arts school for college, and after college, I still wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do, but I still knew that I loved writing, and I had done a couple of internships in news. So I ended up getting my master's degree in journalism, which, looking back, was a great next step for me. But I'm not sure I would have gotten there without the encouragement of my parents, who kind of saw that in me and thought, hey, even if you don't want to be a journalist, you could use those skills for something else.
So they kind of nudged you there. What were you thinking? Or did you just not have any thought about it? Because, a lot of time, and I'm in this camp too, I had no idea what I was going to do at all. And I had to sort of figure out a process around figuring that out. My parents really didn't nudge me, to their credit. What was in your head at the time?
I didn't really know what I wanted to do either. I mean, I think I knew I wanted to do something with writing. Yeah. And because I did and I kind of identified with that already. Like, I felt like that was a piece of me and something I'd be good at. So I figured there was a career ahead there, but I can't say I saw a clear path in one career or another.
So it was writing. You had an aptitude for writing. You get a job. I believe it was with the Houston Chronicle and U.S. News and World Report, if I'm not mistaken. And eventually you ended up kind of striking out on your own and growing a boutique content marketing agency. So the years or the time at doing news and doing writing for kind of traditional media and transitioning into, the agency role, how did that whole thing progress?
So when I was at the Houston Chronicle, I had been there for a few years in a reporting role. Actually, really, I loved the job. I loved reporting. I never thought I'd do anything else. But when I was 27, I decided to take a career break. And I left my job. I backpacked through Africa on my own. I wanted to have like an adventure before I had a family. I knew I wanted to have a family, and I wanted to like get out there and do more traveling. I had studied when I was in undergrad, I had studied in Cameroon for a semester, which is in West Africa. So I wanted to go back there and, see the people that I had met there and just get out and like explore a little bit. But I also didn't want to totally get off the track of my career. So while I was traveling, I made a goal to write get a byline each month. So I wrote one article each month and pitched them to different publications. So when I came back, I had a kind of a portfolio that made it look like I had been, I had been working a little bit while I was traveling, but I was mostly just traveling. But that helped me have something on my resume that I could say, hey, this is what I was doing. And it pushed my career forward a little bit. When I got back, I had to think about like what I want to do next. And that's when I ended up working at U.S. News and World Report. Okay. But let me back up for a second. So when I was looking for that job, I came home. I actually wrote a book when I came home. I lived with my parents. I was like 28 years old, trying to figure out what my next step would be. And I started taking on clients for social media work, which in 2008 was a little bit of a different world than it is now. And I actually enjoyed social media then, which I don't really now.
Yeah.
And so that kind of got me into the idea of like, oh, I could drum up business on my own and I can make money without having a traditional job. And then when I ended up I did get a full-time job at U.S. News and World Report, but I kept some of my clients on the side. And I only ended up staying at that job for a year because I realized that there was way more opportunity for me in running my own business. I had inbound leads coming and I felt like I could make a go of it of turning that into a full-time income for myself. I also had there's a pivotal thing that happened in that time when I was still at U.S. News, which is I released my first ebook, and it was about how to build a part-time social media business. And I sold it for $24. It's just a PDF, but it did really well. And it opened my eyes to I can just write something and people will buy it if it's decent. Like I don't have to have anyone's permission. I don't have to have an employer who says it's okay. And it kind of got the bug for making money online. So combine that with having some opportunities for this business that I had created that was slowly becoming a small agency. And I decided to shift away from a regular day job and into doing my own business. So in those early days, I started as a social media freelancer, and I ended up turning that into a small agency where we managed blogs for businesses. So this is in 2010, 2011. A lot of people are starting to think about content marketing. So we helped businesses that wanted to have blogs and email newsletters and didn't know how to do it on their own. So it was just me and a bunch of contractors. I didn't have any employees. But I ran that business for a number of years.
The story here that's such a common theme is this idea of kind of freelancing being the gateway from the bridge from traditional work to non-traditional work. I've done that several times as well, using this idea of freelancing a skill that I've been paid for, in the past, going out and getting other clients. Now I'm sort of working for myself and I'm getting my feet wet in terms of the responsibilities and the different roles that come with kind of owning your work. So that's so interesting. I didn't really know that piece of it. How did you get your first clients? Was it serendipitous? Were people just saying hey, you write, and oh, by the way, can you do these posts for me? Or did you set out to dabble in that way?
The first client I had came about through a friend. So I was out hiking with a friend, and he worked for a small business that helped people learn how to drive 4x4s. And we were just talking about how they could get more clients. And I gave him a bunch of ideas. And at the end of the conversation, he's like, "You're really good at this. Why don't you talk to my boss and see if we can hire you to run our social accounts?" So they became my first client. I mean, I had freelanced before, when I was traveling, freelanced in terms for articles for publications, but this was the first time I was doing like a recurring project for someone. And that one sticks out in my mind because this is my first client. After that, I think a lot of them came in through SEO. Honestly, I had my own website. I just blogged at alexisgrant.com, and I had an email newsletter I sent to people, over the years. And certainly some clients came from that. I think quite a few of my more notable clients came in through search. Like they saw that we were doing blog management work, and that's what they were looking for. And it was less competitive than I wasn't really trying to rank, honestly, for those types of terms.
Right.
But because I was writing about how to do it, people found us that way.
Right. So the other thing that kind of sticks out about your story thus far, to me, and I think is really important for our listeners, is this idea that you had this foundational skill of writing that you liked and enjoyed, that you were good at. And you thought that you were going to the place to be a writer was reporting. And that's what you were going to do. And I think a lot of times either we have the blinders on that is the path, or we're just not open to the other ways that we can leverage the skills that we have in new ways. But you ended up kind of doing that and figuring it out. And it was really just through the process of continuing to hone your craft. Like you were a reporter, but then you were blogging. And people found you, and you like that's how these interesting paths sort of unfold. Like when we're open to seeing the world in a different way than we saw it yesterday. And so that just stands out to me with your story, here also. How did you decide, I'm just curious from my own personal interests, how did you decide about what you were going to blog about at alexisgrant.com?
Well, gosh, it's funny because, I feel like so many things I've resisted earlier in my career, I ended up doing. Like you just mentioned, like having the blinders on, I refused. I was not interested in business at all. I took no business classes at school. I come from a family of people who are financially savvy. But, that was not, looking back, I wish I'd taken some business classes. And then when I was at the Houston Chronicle, I had been approached about running a blog or using Twitter there. This is in 2005. And I wasn't really interested in it. I really just because I wanted to be out of the office. My job usually is go cover something, you write about it by 5:00 and, that's your day. And I liked that. And I wasn't interested in adding a blog to that, which just felt like another responsibility. But when I was traveling in Africa, I started blogging basically to keep friends and family up to date on where I was. It wasn't as easy to communicate from afar at that point. And a lot of places I didn't even have internet access. So when I did, I would upload a couple of blog posts, here's what I'm up to. And it kind of told a lot of people at once. But that was when things started to it spread just a little bit beyond my friends and family, and other people started reading it too. So at that point, it was more of a practical, how do I share this information with people? And then I made two more transitions after that, thinking through this. When I got back, I started blogging about writing and because I was writing a book, and I connected with a lot of people on Twitter who were in the writing space. Just because that's what I was doing and thinking about, to answer your questions, how do you decide what to blog about? I was just, what do I know? What can I share with people? What's helpful to other people? And that felt comfortable to me. But pretty soon after that, I ended up pivoting again into more writing about building online businesses. And since then, I've kind of, in the last 12 years, I've sort of stayed with that theme, but I don't hold myself to it because my own personal site, I don't write there frequently anymore, but occasionally I do. Mostly if people come to me and ask for me for something again and again, I'll try to write a post about it. So instead of answering them, I can give them the post. But my kind of take on it is, if it's a personal site, it doesn't matter if you change what you're writing about because people are following you because they care about you. And like, yes, there are people occasionally now will write about what I'm doing if they get acquired and people don't care. And that's okay. But there's still like a core audience there that just wants to follow like how my career has morphed and what they can learn from it. So it still ends up being interesting to them. And also I don't like put a lot of pressure on the personal blog. It's for fun for me. It's an outlet. It helps me, blogging and writing helps me think through what I'm working on. And I like it for that aspect. And it helps me stay connected to people. But I don't put a lot of pressure on it in terms of like, it has to give me certain outcomes.
Right. So it's kind of like started as a scratch your own itch type thing and more of a thought process. I talk about like career from an investing perspective a lot because that's my background in trading, or part of my background, part of my many varied backgrounds. And so like that whole process is kind of this whole the process of jotting, writing different things and different topics, right? Like as you're going and as you're learning in your own personal journey, is this sort of diversified like approach where I'm going to put a few things out in the world. I'm going to seed the world with a few ideas and I'm going to get information. And then I can start, as things take off and as I get signal on what is working, I can start to bet bigger and double down in that area. And that's kind of seems like how you've approached your entire career and been able to make changes. You've stuck with like your asset of writing, and then you've planted seeds in different areas. And as those have either sparked your curiosity or you found an opportunity, you've started to kind of plow more resources and attention into that. So I wanted to just highlight that a little bit for our listeners as well, about your journey.
One interesting thing there is I actually, thinking back, the job that I got at U.S. News actually came out of my blog, which is funny because this is in 2010. Obviously they looked at my resume and saw that I had experience working at other news outlets. But at the time, personal blogs were a little bit like, they weren't a total, it wasn't necessarily a positive, I think, to have them. If you were a professional writer or wanted to be at a journalism outlet, it was seen as a little bit rogue. But I had written a post about how to conduct a job search in like different ways. Like, what can you do to get a job that isn't just like looking up websites and applying to roles, and how I was approaching it. So interesting things like connecting with people on Twitter and like just doing things that were like a step beyond or a little bit different. Anyways, the editor at U.S. News saw that when I applied for the job there, and they hired me to be their careers reporter, part because of that blog post that I had really written as a way to organize my thoughts around like what creative tactics can I use to get a job. So it's funny how like sometimes if you're willing to share what you're thinking and in an organized way that can be helpful to other people, it might bring unexpected opportunities toward you.
Yeah, you were kind of like in the early days of personal branding, right? Using this platform. Maybe you didn't maybe consciously think about it that way. You were just putting Lexi out into the world, and serendipitously things came your way. Obviously today there are way more blogs and way more online content. Is that approach still relevant to people today trying to either get a job, figure out what they want to do with their life, or how would you maybe change it or adapt it, today?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's harder to get people to come to you because search is so much more competitive.
Right.
And the social networks can be harder to crack. But I mean, I still do that. Like if I'm looking to hire someone, not only I'm looking at what they send me, but then I'm clicking over to all their social networks and their website and seeing what they've done. And if there's something that resonates on one of those places, then I'm far more likely to want to hire that person. So 100%, I think it still works. Yeah,
it's about showcasing your work product and who you are, as opposed to your credentials. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So the next piece is you go from kind of, at least, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but you go from kind of content marketing agency to being actually acquired by an online content company. So talk us through a little bit about what that was and ultimately how you decided to say yes to that.
Yeah, my company ended up being bought by a personal finance media brand called the Penny Hoarder, which was one of our clients. So we started working together in early 2014, and the founder found my blog management company through a Google search. He was looking for somebody to run the content part of his business. And we took that on, and like over time, we're doing more and more of the job. And it's funny because I was actually at the point where I had one or maybe two editors that were basically full-time for me at that point, and they were contractors, and I was butting up against labor laws and knowing that like pretty soon I'm gonna have to make these people employees to follow the rules and thinking about like, what do I want to do with my business? Do I want employees? What do I want this to look like? And that was when the founder of the Penny Hoarder said, hey, would you want to come in-house and do this for us instead of doing it for your agency? So myself and a handful of members of my team all became employees of the Penny Hoarder. And we also brought with us our wider network of freelancers. And the reason they wanted to do that was because we let go of all of our other clients. So it's called an acqui-hire when your team is brought in-house. So the business as it stood kind of went away, and we went into the Penny Hoarder to run the content operation there. And the benefit of that to that company was that we already had all the processes and the people in place to create great content. So we were able to take off running. And in fact, because of that, we were always like a couple of steps ahead of other parts of the business because we had been running this for years. So we had like the infrastructure there to quickly grow that piece.
How long did you stay on board Penny Hoarder then?
So they acquired the company in the middle of 2015. That was like a year and a half after I started working with the founder. And then I left in 2019.
Okay. So approximately 4 years or so.
Yep.
Okay. So that's that's an interesting piece of the story in that, you didn't set out to build a content marketing agency, but this is like the upside of taking risk, right? Like
100%. Yeah. And I actually think that what you're going to say is like, to me, that one of the biggest lessons, like looking back on my career, was that step. Because what happened was I was at U.S. News. I left it to do my own thing. I was doing my own thing for a while. And because I had taken that risk and was now working for myself and built up an asset, when I was acquired by the Penny Hoarder, I became an employee again, which by the way, I was never planning to do. Like I thought I would run my own business forever. But the opportunity there and like the chance to build something that was much bigger than I'd probably do on my own was appealing to me. But financially, like the leap up that I took there was way more than I would have ever gotten if I had stayed at a journalism job or even bounced between different jobs working for someone else. So like looking back, I always think about how, hey, look, because I left and did something on my own, I built something which then I was able to leverage to increase my compensation many times beyond what I would have earned previously.
Yeah, exactly right. And you did it I think a lot of times people have this idea that working for yourself, and building a business are kind of synonymous and also risky. And they just stop there, right? Like, oh, that's too risky for me, or I don't know how to do that. And the reality is like risk uncertainty and what you can learn is sort of malleable. Like things are risky at different points in time. And there are ways to sort of mitigate that, along the way to make the risk pretty equivalent to taking a full-time job, right? Like the idea of stepping out and being a freelancer and getting one client and keeping a full-time job, like there's no risk there, like whatsoever. And then the next piece is you get 2 clients and then you say, oh God, all I got to do is get 5 and I can quit my job. Like there's this stair-stepped approach to risk that I think is really important. And then people don't necessarily think about that upside, right? Like risk cuts both ways, actually. Mm-hmm. And in your case, you kind of took it all the way to fruition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like as a society, we've come up with this kind of dumb idea that like you're more secure in a full-time job, which in reality, like all your eggs are in that one basket. yes, there are certainly perks. I mean, you're going to get paid even if you're sick. You can maybe slack off from the job and still get paid, which isn't going to happen if you're running your own business, likely. But it's also, to me, personally, I feel like it's less risky to run my own business, especially if you're a freelancer that has lots of different clients. Like, you lose one client, you just replace it with another, and you still have those other 4. So I think there's a lot of different ways of thinking about it. And I think, like, the way our society pushes people towards, the only form of security is having a full-time job, just isn't true. I do think it's a good step for, like, a first person coming out of school. I feel like I learned a lot from working at companies those first few years out of school that I then applied to running my own business. And I see some people who start their own business without having ever worked for anyone else, and they don't really have, like, a framework of how someone else has done it. I think you learn a lot from being part of an organization that does some things right and some things wrong, and you learn from it. So I do think it's good to have some of that experience. But yeah, the idea that, like, you should always stay in a full-time job because it's more secure just feels like a bunch of baloney.
I agree with the point that you made about picking up skills and learning how to work in an organization. I think those are valuable. That's actually something I didn't have young. And I ended up going back and kind of working in a corporate environment for the first time I was in my 30s. And I learned a lot there. I wouldn't trade it. I obviously left. I couldn't take it anymore, but I learned a lot. And I kind of almost wish I did have some of those experiences earlier on. All right. So you built this, you got acquired, you built, you were part of building an online media company as a very early employee through this acquisition, and you leave after a while. So what happened there? What was the thought process? I'm sure I can guess, but I want our listeners to know.
Well, the biggest piece was I felt burned out. We were a bootstrapped company, but we were very well resourced. So we moved really fast, and I hired a lot of people in a short number of years. And I also had 2 kids at the same time, 2 babies. And now my kids are 5 and 7, and I know it gets easier, but at the time I felt like it was impossible, and I felt like I was drowning, even though, I was doing the best I could. Both my husband and I found it really hard during those years to have little kids and both, like, be doing big things at work. So there's a lot of little reasons why I left. Like, another reason was I was I had moved to Florida for the company because a lot of us were in person in Florida, and we knew that as a family, we love hiking in the mountains and we didn't want to be there forever. And we were kind of eager to find a place where we wanted to stay for a while. And the company also went through a transition where we had layoffs, and that was where the timing came in. So I kind of knew that I was hitting my personal breaking point and needed a break. And at the same time, the company was going through layoffs. So I kind of helped the company get through that layoff, but then as part of that, took the opportunity to transition as well. And it felt like the right timing, because it felt like it was, I had been there alongside the founder for a few years, and I didn't want my leaving to disrupt the company. But because it was already going through so many changes, it felt like the timing worked out okay.
And what was the plan? Like, did you have anything lined up, or were you just going to kind of chill for a while?
I laugh because this was in 2019. Obviously, I thought I would chill. We moved, so that was a big deal. My kids were 2 and 4 or whatever, so that was a tough move, getting us settled in a new place. My goal was to just figure out what I wanted to do next. I knew I wanted to build another company, but I didn't know what it was going to be. And I figured I'd take a little bit of time off and then get into it. But then, shocker, 2020,
yeah.
Having no childcare kind of threw a wrench in those plans for a long time. I ended up doing a little bit of consulting, which was fun. And I helped some companies build their writing teams, which was a lot of what I had done at the Penny Hoarder. So I got to try that out and see if I wanted to do that long term, which I decided I didn't. And then I also, during that time, I kind of skipped over this, but when I was at the blog, when I had the agency, this was in 2013, we had started a website called The Right Life. And the reason we did that was because when we were running blogs for clients, we had all the systems in place. Like we had an editor on each blog and writers for each blog and all the systems to run these blogs. And I kind of had an aha moment then that if any of these clients were to leave us, we would no longer see the fruits of our labor because they would be paying us every month for what we had built. And I wanted to apply the systems that we're using to other people's blogs to our own asset that we could build. So we started a website for writers and applied the same exact systems. Like we treated it like a client. And I ended up, we grew that blog. And even while I was at the Penny Hoarder, I didn't have time for it, but I had an editor who was running that blog, not doing a ton with it, but just kind of keeping it going so it would slowly keep growing. And when I left the Penny Hoarder, I kind of had that as like my project to come back to while I was figuring out what I was going to do next. So I toyed around with the idea of like, do I want to blow this blog up? Like, do I want to focus on, make it my next thing and make this my next big project? And I worked on it for like on and off, not full time or anything, but just like here and there for about a year, mostly working on the SEO because it was like a fun project for me and I got to learn a lot by doing that. But what I ultimately decided was it felt like going backwards in time. Like I wasn't really interested in it anymore. I felt like what I had been curious about a decade before and I wanted a new project. So I sold that business. So getting to that point kind of kept me busy as well during the pandemic. I sold it in 2021. And that was when I really felt like I had the brain space to start thinking about like, especially because then we started having a little more childcare and like, what do I want to do next? So I started working on a new company in the fall of 2021, and I didn't launch it until February of 2022. So it was just crazy to me that it was like basically 3 years from when I left the Penny Hoarder to when I launched a new company. And I did other things in between there, but that was certainly not my plan. I was thinking like I'd take a few months off and then get back into a new thing. And it took me a lot longer than that to get to it.
You say that wasn't my plan. You've said that a few times in this conversation, which I just love because I can just totally relate. But I keep coming back to this idea of how you manage those transitions then. And what you did. And it was, you went back to the consulting thing, right? Like you're known, you have a skill set, you're known for this. And you use consulting again to kind of manage through a transition. And the other piece that stands out to me is with your agency and using clients to fund your asset growth, right? Like that is a common thing. I did that as well with my company. And I think I want people so everybody listening who's got a job, right now, think about how you can do that with your current job income. Use your job income to finance something you can own and operate and take with you, just like Lexi did. I think that is such a key to unraveling. It's income diversity, right? Diversification. It's learning. It's knowledge. It's being out there and open to the upsides of risk. People finding you new opportunities, right? But that you can use the same approach and you don't have to have a client to do that. You can get your personal expenses under control. You can allocate money to spend to invest on learning a side hustle or getting more knowledge, courses or whatever. Like that whole process works whether you're an entrepreneur or not. So I just wanted to make that highlight there. So the business that you alluded to is they got acquired, right? That's the name of the site. And I was lucky enough to be one of your interviews for this early on when you were launching. How did you ultimately decide that that's what you want to do? And I just love how you're highlighting small entrepreneurs and bringing a voice to the other side of startup culture, which is sort of drowned out by raise a whole bunch of money, Silicon Valley, grow, hustle culture and all of that.
I think by this time I knew kind of some of the things that I wanted my next project to check off. And I also knew some of the things I wanted to avoid. I knew I wanted to avoid a client-based business because I just didn't want to serve clients. I think running a content agency even now would be a great way to make a ton of money, but I don't want to do it. So I was thinking ahead to like, first of all, what do I want my life to look like? And how can I design a business that will support that? And then also what skills do I have that I can apply and what do I want to learn? So I knew that I wanted to do something in media again, because that's my strength.
Skills.
And
yeah.
And I thought about doing things that are totally different than that, and some of them do appeal to me, but I'm like, you know what? It doesn't make sense to it makes sense to use what I've learned, I think, in some way.
Yeah.
So because of that, I still wanted a new challenge. So I said like, okay, what can I do that's like uses media skills, but challenges me in new ways? Because I didn't want to just like throw up another website. To me, that felt like I've already tried that and I've already done that. When I came up with this idea because I've sold 2 content businesses, and both times I felt like there weren't a lot of resources for people who are selling smaller deals. So we cover 6, 7, and low 8-figure deals, which is small in the acquisition space. And there's really not, besides us, like that many resources for doing that or helping you connect with the right professionals to help you through that process. And I certainly didn't know where to go when I was there. So it felt like it solved my own personal pain point, and that's why I came up with the idea. But the other boxes that it checked for me, in addition to using my media skills, I wanted to learn something new. And there's 2 ways in which I consider this project to help, like that's helping me grow and stretch. One is I'm certainly not an M&A expert. I am slowly learning about M&A, mergers and acquisitions, that means. And it's funny because like people now are asking me to speak on the topic, which I still completely feel like an imposter, because I'm like, we interview a lot of people, and I've talked to a lot of founders who have sold their business now, but I still don't consider myself an expert on the topic. So I'm getting to learn through that process. And then the way that we're monetizing the site is a little bit different than what I've done in the past. If you look at the website, we tell stories of founders who have sold their business. So on the front end, it's a media company, but on the back end, we're building a database of all of those acquisitions. So we have thousands of online businesses that have sold in our database and the metrics around what those sales look like. And the goal is to eventually sell that data so that that's how I'm hoping to fund the business. And since we've launched, we've discovered a couple of other revenue streams that I didn't even like anticipate ahead of the launch that we're leaning into now. But I still am hoping that data piece is going to be a big component of how we fund our operations going forward. And that's a way of monetizing that I have never tried yet. So it's something for me to learn there too.
I love your approach here, because I think a lot of times when we go to what am I going to do next? And oh my God, there are a million different possibilities. Like we can get overwhelmed, right? Like we go on Twitter or whatever, and we see these people doing all of these different things. We're like, I could do that too. But your process around making this decision was, one, I need to use the skills that I have. Like it's kind of stupid not to, because that's starting from a foundation rather than starting over fresh. And then the other piece, which I hadn't, because I do a lot of thinking about this and frameworking around how to make these types of decisions and decrease uncertainty and increase action. And what you said was, what do I want to learn? And I thought that was really interesting. Like I hadn't thought about it necessarily from that standpoint, other than I guess curiosity and from the energy component. But that was really, again, you're using your heart kind of to pull you in the direction rather than like necessarily cerebrally thinking about, well, what's the biggest business opportunity here? It's more a criteria of like, well, I'm Lexi. I'm the person that has to spend the next, 40, 50 years working. Like, what do I want to work on? Like, what's going to get me excited, and using that curiosity to fuel where you go. Like that's a really interesting take that I think a lot of our listeners can apply to their situations as well.
Yeah. I mean, you're reminding me too of another thing that I thought heavily about, which was what's my mission, my personal mission in the world? And like, how am I going to use this business to further that? Because like the thing that I personally care about and I'm really passionate about is raising up other female founders and like helping women make money so we can own a bigger share of the world and make more decisions in the world. And especially with like all the current events in the last few years, I like feel like more and more that's like my personal mission. And at first I was like, is they get acquired like close enough to that? Because I really want to make a dent in that in the world. But after I thought about it a lot, I realized it really is, because like we're not just for women or anything. We're for all founders. But I don't want to have a place that's just for women. Like I believe that to lift women up, we have to be in the bigger world with everyone else. And there really aren't that many female voices in M&A. So if like you're reading about business stuff, there's not that many places where you can go where you'll find a female voice. So to me, having this company where women feel like they can trust me and they can come into this ecosystem where we write about everybody, but that includes women, and we can also make an effort to showcase women, which a lot of other brands maybe try, but I think it can be really challenging if you don't have women on staff who they can trust, you know? So in the end, I feel like it really ends up supporting that mission as well. And that's the part that like keeps me going, because if you start something, like I know I'm gonna have to stick with this for a while, like you said, it has to be something I actually care about. And that's the piece that brings it together for me to care about it.
Okay. Makes a lot of sense. I'm assuming you see a lot of businesses that started as side hustles and eventually grew to a point where they were actually acquired. Mm-hmm. Do you have a ballpark estimate as to like what maybe the percentage breakdown of like stuff that starts as a side hustle in your database is?
I have no idea, but that's a good idea to slice it that way. But it's pretty common. A lot of the entrepreneurs that we feature, they sell their business because they've started a new business and they want to focus on the new business instead. Or many of them started it as like a small project, experimenting with something, and then it grew into a bigger company that they could sell eventually. So it's definitely common. I mean, I think it's smart too, because it's like you want to try experimenting with something before you throw your entire self into it. Like you talked about, like decreasing risk. That's a good way to do it. Right.
Managing that risk and uncertainty helps you take action on it. If our listeners were to go to your site, what are they going to learn? I mean, they're going to get stories on different founders and how they came up with something and their exit, obviously. What else is in there for them that they can maybe apply to their current situation?
I mean, the biggest thing I think if someone's thinking about running a business is understanding from the beginning what you can do now to make so that you have an asset you can sell later. And you see second and third time founders thinking about this, but like, I never planned to sell either of my other two businesses. So I certainly didn't build them from the beginning with the intention to sell them. But once you start to understand how to get maximum value from your company, like now that I'm starting to get acquired, I also don't have a plan to sell this in the immediate future. Like I want to create something I can run for a while that I enjoy. But even so, I like do all the things from the beginning now that I had to do later with my other businesses, just because I know that it makes sense to do them from the beginning, so that it's like a machine that can run itself. And if I eventually want to sell it, I can. So it's just getting that foresight, learning from people who have done it before, what they would have done differently, so that you can avoid some of the same mistakes that we all make.
And then, with thinking about building, they got acquired versus going out and getting a different job. These things are obviously two wholly different things. And as we've talked about, like the media narrative is raise money. If you want to start a business, you have to raise money and, all this kind of stuff. What have you learned from either talking with these other founders and all of these stories, or through your own experience building They Got Acquired, about reducing the risk of building a business by sort of bootstrapping? Is there anything that has stood out to you as like a theme?
I love bootstrapping. It's like the path for me at this moment. But I used to think that like it was never a good idea to raise money. Like, why would anyone want to do that? Because a lot of it doesn't align with my values, but I've come around to the idea that it does make sense for certain companies. So it's really not that there's a right or a wrong answer. It's just like, what is right for you and your company at this moment? And what kind of lifestyle do you want to live right now? Because whether you raise money is probably going to affect how hard you're working and how much time you're putting to the business. But it's funny because I think a key lesson that I learned along the way was you have to invest money to earn money.
Yeah.
But then I've had instances where I've taken that to the extreme and want to pull back and say, wait a minute, but I've got to take money home from this for it to be sustainable for me. So I think finding that balance where yes, you want to invest in the business, but you also need to make sure that you're fueling your own self. And if you have a family, your family, so that it's a sustainable choice for you over the long run.
Yeah. I think to me, if I would answer my own question, just thinking about it and being in similar situations, I think the key is, and this applies to a side hustle or even investing in your own continued growth and learning and skills. It's like, it's the sequence of what has to happen first and investing for that. When you think about building a business, it's like, well, what is the first thing that has to happen? I don't have to go get a social media rep and product designer and all this other stuff. It's like, I need to find customers that are going to can test my product and make sure I have fit and, get all that done before I start to really build the infrastructure around promotion. Yeah. It's this idea of, I think that's what the benefit of bootstrapping does is it forces you to sequence correctly and not kind of slack on what has to happen first.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Because I sometimes say to myself, would I be doing more or better if I raise money for what I'm doing right now? But I think it's a forcing function when you bootstrap is you have to prioritize. So it's forcing us to decide, what do we want to do? What's the most important thing to do right now? Rather than trying to do all the things. And if I had a huge team, I'd probably try to do all the things. But instead, it's like making us say, okay, what's the most important thing for the business right now? And I think that can be, and also it also does, like you said, it forces you to prioritize making money, which there's so many businesses out there that aren't really businesses because they're not actually making money. They've raised a lot of money, but they haven't figured out how to make money from their customers. And if you have to figure that out from the very start, then it's going to give you an advantage in the long run.
Yeah. Totally. And I think you can apply that to your career and your growth plan. What is the next thing that's going to get me to the next thing? What's the tiny step outside of my rung that's going to open up new opportunities? Focus there, cut everything else out. Focus there, sequence that. I think that's a powerful lesson. All right, Lexi, we're going to run to the rapid close questions here, which I gave you a little preview of. So, you don't have to take a lot of time here, but just whatever kind of pops out to you. I'm really interested to hear from you and all the work that you've done. If there's another recent author, thought leader, or influencer that you've recently come across that's really caught your attention that you're watching. Yeah.
I can think of a lot, but I'm thinking of for your audience, people that are listening, if anyone hasn't checked out Jenny Blake, she had a book called Life After College when, this was years and years ago. But she's become a good friend of mine now. And she's a great, she's a thought leader for sure. And has a lot of great content around building your career. So check her out.
You might be the second guest that's actually recommended her. I have to go back and check.
She's great.
Excellent. All right. Number 2 is, what book are you reading now or have you read recently that's made a really big impact on you?
Atomic Habits. I feel like that's a popular answer now. So I almost hesitate to say it, but I'm rereading it. I read it a few years ago and I'm rereading it now. Or I read it, whenever it came out. And I got it now here because it's a good one.
Yeah. You can take some bite-sized reads out of that one. You can reread it and revisit it. And it's all about habit formation. And I'm a big fan of saying the best plan that you can have is one that you can adhere to and keep doing. And there's a bunch of gems in there about how to build tiny habits and make your plans easier to adhere to. So I'm a big fan of that book as well.
Yeah. What I like, even like, I don't always follow all the habit tips in it, but what I like is it reminds me that you have to stick with something to see results.
Yes.
And he has some great graphs in there that show like, you feel like you're not making any progress. You're actually like right ahead of a huge jump in your career. And I feel like that happens. Like it's a lesson I have to learn over and over.
Yeah. It's hard to believe that that's going to happen when you're not necessarily seeing it in action, but yeah, it's true. All right. Number 3, do you have one piece of advice for someone just starting out in the world or trying to get a foothold in this world? Like what's the biggest lesson you've learned about life that you want a young person to know?
Try a lot of different things, because you might try something and you didn't expect to like and end up enjoying it and finding it's, a successful path for you.
Love it. Love it. You got to build an options portfolio to learn. You can't learn by trying to think your way through a problem. You have to kind of experience it and stack those experiences against each other to know what you like and what you don't like. I love it. And number 4, there's a lot of uncertainty and anxiety in the world right now. We've got a lot of tech layoffs. We've got uncertainty going on. I want you to bring a little bit of, I don't know the word for it, but what is getting you excited about in the next 12 months? What's making you excited, and what are you looking forward to and have optimism for the next 12 months?
I mean, I love the turn of the new year. I think going into January is like just such a fun time because I like planning for the coming year and thinking about all the things we can achieve. And yeah, I mean, I feel like I don't do great with uncertainty, and it's been a theme of like my life, and I'm sure everyone's lives for the last few years. So I'm hoping that the coming year can feel a little more certain, at least for like my personal bubble in my family, to the point where we can have a routine and really make some progress on this business, because I just started this business 6 months ago, and I feel like we're starting to hit our stride. So like, this is when it gets fun, is like when you start to see some wins and start to gain a little momentum. So yeah, I'm excited about that.
Awesome. All right. Well, this has been a great conversation. I'm so glad we got to catch up finally. We've been playing a little podcast tag, if you will.
Yes.
But it was great to catch up with you. I love following your progress. I wish you all the best. I'm a huge fan and a huge supporter. So thank you for being here. I just want you to leave us with where people can find you online. We talked about they got acquired, but anywhere else you want people to find you online.
Yeah, theyGotAcquired.com/newsletter. Get on our newsletter list and we'll send you good resources. Or I'm on Twitter at Alexis Grant.
Excellent. We'll make sure we link to all those in the show notes and in our social channels when everything comes out. Lexi, thanks so much for being here, and have a great rest of your week and weekend.
Thanks.